Okay, today on the podcast, I am joined by Gary Boulanger. He is the editor-in-chief of the Silicon Valley Business Journal, which is the leading source of local business news, data, and networking for the Silicon Valley and the San Jose, California region. So, Gary, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Looking forward to it, Paul. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah. And, we kind of just met right when we hopped on this call. So I'd love if you could tell me and the audience just a little about your career background and like what's led you to this point.
Well, it starts with me wanting to be a cartoonist, but being told by well-intentioned but misinformed adults when I was in eighth grade that there's no money in that. And that evolved into me wanting to take my art and be an architect, thinking, all right, that's a little bit more highbrow. Freshman year in high school, friend on the soccer team. His dad was a preeminent architect in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where I grew up. He's like, son, the computer age is coming. We're all going to be out of a job, so look elsewhere. So I took that to heart. Meanwhile, I was an athlete and an artist, and using both sides of my brain and my body. And when I got through high school, I went to an all-male college prep high school. There were 64 in our class, suit coats and ties, hair couldn't touch the collar. So I was kind of lower middle class, and I was hanging out with a lot of upper middle class. And the entrepreneurial spirit and the storytelling, I realized when I asked open-ended questions of my friend Duffy's dad, the bank president, and other folks in my high school extended community, that they opened up and I was able to further conversations. Well, that didn't mean that I went into journalism right away. I went into college wanting to play soccer, and also I signed on for the nebulous marketing course. The business school at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater was and still is one of the top in the Midwest. So I lucked out there, but I was a little disenfranchised a couple years in just because it wasn't really resonating with me. Again, the artist side of me and the more joyful side of me was feeling a little stale with statistics and accounting and the other important aspects around marketing and business. So I decided, I think on my mom's advice, really, oh, Gary, such a great conversation. Listen, you've always been a storyteller. We can't shut you up. So I decided to go into journalism my junior year. This is back in 1986, 1987 or so. And so the journalism program was also very robust at the university. So I lucked out there. But because I was a little bit of a latecomer to it, I didn't work at the high school newspaper. I was a paper boy, so I was familiar with the Green Bay Press Gazette, but that doesn't mean that I had the journalistic instinct. Because of my love for music and being an athlete all those years, I did work for the school newspaper, the Daily Purple. And right away, I was the music and sports reporter, and I just gobbled it up, and I loved it, and all that unbridled youthful enthusiasm led to one thing and another. And there was an opportunity to have an internship unpaid in May of 1988 for the organization or the publisher called Johnson Hill Press in nearby Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. So I became the intern, and Steve Ely was the editor at the time, and he loved my enthusiasm and go-getter attitude. So I ended up being thrown into the very deep end of the pool and coming up for air quickly and just gobbling everything up. And I loved it. I got married in July of 89, and my wife graduated from the same university in December of 88. Married in 1989, still working at Johnson Hill Press. 18 credits, working at Johnson Hill Press pretty much full time. I just couldn't get enough. And at a certain point, I realized I'm in the middle of it right now. Why do I need to graduate? Why do I need a degree? I was so forward thinking without thinking of the practical things. Thankfully, my wife, Jean, said, you got to finish what you started. You didn't come this far for nothing. And I had such wonderful mentors because Johnson Hill Press was a large group of trade publications. Mine was Furniture Wood Digest. My good buddy, Steve Smith, that got me into cycling, he was with Yarn and Garden, and there was FBO and all these very dry sounding trade publications, but it was magazine craft. So I was learning newspaper craft in school, magazine craft, even though it was unpaid. And that really catapulted things. But the unfortunate thing, when I graduated in December of 89, the jobs are far and few between. And I wasn't really interested in getting into the local journalism, right? Whether it's city council or ambulance chasing. And again, this is me having discovered cycling in mid 1988 through Steve, having come off all these years of being a music buff and an athlete, that I ended up just getting a job at Foot Locker. And it sounds like a stretch, but it was a way to pay the bills. But that led to my first um, self audit, my first career audit in December of 1990 or so. My in-laws were part of an Austin Ely car club, and a fellow member of their car club, Jim Mortek, owned a Schwinn bicycle dealer. And at the time, Schwinn was the brand. And because I was so into cycling, I wanted to gobble up every aspect. And so my journalistic training led to my being asked to be manager of Jim Mortek's second location in Franklin, Wisconsin. And this is just south of Milwaukee, mind you. Milwaukee, Madison, Wisconsin's always been a hotbed of cycling. And the bike shop I was managing was named Bicycle Dealer Showcase Top 100 Dealer. So I reached out to Walt Jarvis, the editor of Bicycle Dealer Showcase, and said, hey, I want to put together a press release and let the Milwaukee Journal and the other local publications know that, hey, amongst all these dealers here, and there were dozens at the time, we're the tops. And he's like, oh, pretty interesting for a bike shop manager to reach out journalistically. So he ended up asking me to write a monthly column for the publication. And that gave me, that gave me entry into the bicycle industry, where I started interviewing bike shop owners, bike company CEOs, bicycle racers, bicycle designers, and couldn't get enough of that. And it was nice. It was nice folding money on top of the job itself. But I wanted more, more, more. And to accelerate it a little bit, after one of the companies I was working for in the bicycle industry was bought by Huffy Bicycles in 1999, we moved lock, stock, and barrel to Dayton, Ohio. And I didn't even know where Dayton was. I had to look on a map, embarrassingly so. But when the internet bubble burst, because the company I was working for was like the Dell Computers of bicycles, it was tough going. So I hung my hat out there to be a freelance writer, and did a little bit of PR consulting, just because I figured as a communications expert, there are times as a journalist where it's tough to make a living. At times as maybe a PR consultant, but it rains gold from the skies, but it's fleeting. And I'm glad I had the attitude, because the industries were starting to change as well. Because when e-commerce kicked in, there are a lot of empty promises to jump ship from pure journalism and work for the e-commerce companies, as we called them. But again, those were fleeting, and I wanted something with a bit more longevity. Wonderfully so, the experience that I had as not just a freelance writer, but working in the bicycle shop, and interviewing so many bicycle shop owners that have been doing it for decades. A lot of the questions were, what'd you do right? What would you different? What would you do differently? What'd you do wrong? If you were starting again, what would you do? So I took all that, bundled it up, convinced my wife we should open a bicycle shop, a little boutique bicycle shop in Dayton, Ohio. And Dayton, Ohio also had a very storied and rich and robust cycling history. I continued to freelance write. I was the U.S. correspondent for Bike Europe in the Netherlands. They liked my insight. And so much of it came easy to me, because I was always working the phones to people all over the place, just getting more information. What happened is, when I was writing a monthly column, actually no, it was biweekly, for another trade publication that's been around since 1992, Bicycle Retail and Industry News. And I was asked to and paid to write about the daily ups and downs of starting a boutique bicycle shop and launching a brand, which is very unique. My editor, Michael Gamstetter, did a great job of just packaging it up and putting it out there. And I caught the attention of highly respected, Steve Jobs-esque pioneer of the mountain bike scene, Tom Ritchie, out in California at the time. And he invited me to Rwanda. And this was late 2005. And I said, why would I go to Rwanda, Tom? He goes, well, some American business people have asked me to go there and maybe tour the country and see if there's some sort of a rebranding, if you will, of the country. Because they went through their genocide in 1994. And these American business people thought, well, maybe mountain biking tourism, maybe just something, just throwing it out there. And Tom loves to travel. He has an office, has had an office in Switzerland for decades, and he has an office in Taiwan and so forth. So he asked me along, but again, I didn't know where Rwanda was. I knew of it. So I look up on a map and then I started doing the math on how much it would cost to get there from Dayton, Ohio. It's about 2,500 bucks. And this was 20 years ago. So I thought about it. Of course, sharing that with the family, like, are you kidding? Why would you go to Rwanda? And of course, all they knew was about the news from all those years prior. So I decided, you know what? What an opportunity. And I learned then and there, when someone makes an offer, don't overthink it. Just say yes and figure it out. And so I called Tom back. I said, well, if you're buying, I'm flying. He's like, great. But it turns out that the American business people were Starbucks and Costco. There's a lot of natural resources that Rwanda had been wanting to export, but they didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have railway. They didn't have roads where they could actually use DHL and other shippers to get stuff out of the country. So as it turned out, it's pretty fortuitous to send some avid mountain bikers and some bike industry people over there, because we ended up touring the country by mountain bike. And we realized that with my connectivity in the bicycle industry all those years, that the country needed a rebranding. If we storytell through bicycle racing, let's start a cycling academy where we train up all these young men and young women who were following us around as we were. I mean, I wasn't world class fit, but I was pretty doggone fit. Tom has always been world class fit, and the other cyclists we had with us were fit. Of course, our bicycles were top of the line, high tech, right? And yet here we are floating through these trails in the jungle and on these highways and byways and these ripped up roads. And these young kids are following us on these 40, 50-pound single speed bikes from China and from India. They're carrying on conversations, asking us all these questions. We came back to the United States late December of 2005. We were there for 10 days. In February of 2006, we launched a nonprofit. We asked Jonathan Boyer, who was the first American to race the Tour de France in 1981, to go over there, move over there and launch the academy. But we also realized as we were spelunking on our mountain bikes that with the, I don't know how many thousand coffee and tea plantations, with coffee cherries specifically, and that's what they call before they become coffee beans, all the coffee cherry pickers, they get paid a premium to deliver fresh cherries to the washing stations before they're made into, what we see as the beans pre-roasting. Well, like I mentioned, with all the beaten up roads, they were walking. They'd be carrying hundreds of pounds. Families would be carrying this. By the time they get to the washing station, the quality had waned. The premium was down, so they weren't getting the return on their investment of their time. But there were very industrious young and older men that had used machetes to create Fred Flintstone-esque wooden bikes, and they were very rough. And they couldn't bomb up the hill, but they can push them along, right, fully loaded. But they would bomb down. They hit these hills with the ruts and the rocks and everything else. Some of them were getting hurt. Some of them were dying, but they were industrious. So we saw the wooden bike, and Tom and I, being bicycle designers, we designed a cargo bicycle that could haul up to 300 pounds of coffee cherries. So with Tom's son Jay's help, and with my connections and Tom's in the bicycle industry, we also connected with a lot of Rwandan-based nonprofits and micro lenders. We ended up delivering 2,000 coffee hauling cargo bikes. And with Charity to Africa, if you give it away, the bad people are going to intercept, and it's not going to get to the good people. And we knew that early on. So with microloans, each coffee co-op, and it could be made of 5 to 10 to 15 coffee farmers, they would hold each other accountable for the princely sum of $150 that was the landed cost for this tandem bicycle, right? Totally serviceable. That's why Jay went over there to deliver the 2,000 and to make sure everyone was up to speed with assembly, maintenance, and so forth. Current with Jock starting the cycling academy. And this happened after we went back to identify, okay, which of these young men can we identify to join the academy that we can someday train and have them race either the Olympics, the Tour de France, cycling world championship, whether it's mountain bike, track, road, you name it. And that would be the ultimate rebranding of the country, because all eyes are on sports. Well, the gentleman that won it, Adrian Nyanshuti, in 2006, ended up becoming a pro, and he raced the Olympics in 2012 in London on the mountain bike. So I'd like to think the opportunity we had to go over there as bicycle people and being allowed the opportunity to help identify through what we knew with two wheels and the worldwide community that supports cycling had a bit of a ripple effect on that. That being said, mind you, I was still in Dayton, Ohio. Everything was fine. Well, when we launched Project Rwanda, Tom was like, "You got to move out to California. We gotta go arm in arm and launch this thing together." Like, oh my gosh, what a great opportunity, you know. So we did. We closed up shop. We moved to California with the plans to relocate our bicycle shop in Marin County, which is north of here. That those plans fell through. So on a wing and a prayer, we ended up just my wife and I and my young family just hitting the reset button. And as fate would have it, one of my editors who I was freelancing for off and on over the years is like, "Hey, do you know anyone in the Bay Area that would want to be the U.S. editor of our fledgling bicycle website called Bike Radar?" I said, "Tony, do you know where I live right now?" He goes, "No, no." He goes, "No, man, I thought you're in Dayton, right?" I said, "No, I'm in the Bay Area." He's like, "Oh my." So gave me a ticket. I flew out there a couple months later, and I became the founding U.S. editor of Bike Radar. So I was able to finally, after all those years, be a full-time bicycle editor after all those years of freelancing. And that also allowed us to pay some exorbitant bills living here in Silicon Valley, coming from a very affordable Dayton, Ohio, staying connected with the bicycle industry. And it's sometimes good to have that media badge when you walk into a room, right? I wouldn't say you're everyone's friend, but doors definitely open up. The challenging thing about that was, in hindsight, is that was February 2007 when that opportunity started. We all know that social media reared its wonderful slash ugly head late that year, early next, as far as Instagram and Twitter and so forth, and that really undercut things. When I left Bike Radar in the fall of 2009, you know, it was one of those, well, let's get back to freelancing. Let's keep the byline out there. But fast forward to 2015, I was the editor of Bicycle Times magazine. So I finally became an editor of a print magazine, just in time for print to just boom, you know, just ring around the toilet bowl, right? And the pay wasn't great because you don't shake that money tree a whole lot when you're going to advertise print. What do you think about that? Here's our rate card. And it's like, is this trackable? You know, what are the metrics? Like, here's our rate card. Trust us, right? It's been audited. Trust us. So it was kind of with a heavy heart that I really, for the first time, left a dream job, so to speak, July of 15. But I had caught the motorcycle bug a couple years before. And our son, Henri, when he turned 18, is like, "Hey, Dad, Mom, I'm taking a motorcycle course. I'm buying a scooter, and I'm not going to get a driver's license for my car, but I'm going to get around by two motorized two wheels. And I'm not asking permission. I'm just telling you what I'm doing. Is that cool?" I'm like, "Not only is that cool, but I want to join you. I want to get back. I want to get back into it." So I became that sponge for the motorcycle industry. And wouldn't you know it, when I hit the reset button on after 25 years in the bicycle industry at 49, I had an opportunity to enter the motorcycle industry, and I became senior editor at Cycle World magazine, which is the largest motorcycle publication in the world, based in Orange County, California. And I became kind of like their lifestyle and culture editor, and I loved it. It was such an easy transition, Paul, from what I was doing in bicycles, because same dynamic, same people. Unfortunately, about 2, 3 years into it, same thing happened with the state of the health of the publishing side. I think my one and only article in print, because I was tasked with just churning out the digital, right? Digital first. The one time I was asked to do a print story, it was bookended by probably the preeminent motorsports journalists of our time, Peter Egan. So my one print story for Cycle World was I wrote about the guy that saved Norton motorcycles in the mid 70s. And I had 500 words, and Peter had like this 3,000 word story about just Norton itself, right? And it just blew my mind. But again, the motorcycle industry was not exempt from the challenges. So when I left there in September of 2018, I thought, well, maybe I need to get into communications and just step away from journalism for a while, the media side. And I did. I started working for Fox Racing Shocks. It was also my best paying job ever. So that was kind of cool, especially at my age at the time. That lasted for about 4 years. And again, there was a career audit where I didn't really care for the new CEO. about 6 months into it, he came on board, kind of big ego, big changes. I didn't like what he was doing with the storied brand. Hey, Gene, I took her out to dinner in October of 22. Hey, Gene, thinking of leaving Fox, but I don't have a plan. And I'd like a year to think about it. Now, mind you, living in Silicon Valley, where our rent is about $3,400 for a two-bedroom tiny duplex and all the other high costs of living. Hey, Gene, do you trust me? Well, of course I trust you. Have you had fun since we moved to California with all this uncertainty? Oh God, yes. All right, cool. Here's what I'd like to do. I want to leave my job at Fox. And I was communications director. I said, here's what I'd like to do in 2023. Let's have fun. Let's travel. You and I have not been to Europe. We've always talked about taking a motorcycle trip over there. Let's do it. Don't worry about the money. So I guess it was a self-imposed sabbatical. And wouldn't you know it, we were two up on a BMW motorcycle. This was a tour of all the Alps. So this was the trip of a lifetime. It was 12 days. We're coming over the Furka Pass and we're coming around Hotel Belvedere. There's a scene in Goldfinger, the James Bond film from 1965, 66, where James is driving his Aston Martin and Goldfinger's up on ahead, heading to Geneva, I believe. And I look out and we have our Bluetooth connected. And I said, Gene, I know what I'm going to do next. She's like, I'm sorry, what? I said, I'm going to get back into local journalism. She's like, okay, buddy. And I said, no questions. It just came to me, but I don't have any details. She's like, okay. And then we ended up enjoying our trip. And we get back a week to the day after we get back from this trip of a lifetime, Paul. Our landlord says, hey, you have until the end of the year, but we're not renewing your lease, which is code in Silicon Valley for we want you out so we can remodel the place and we can triple the rent,
Mm-hmm.
which they did, which was like, oh my gosh, is this a heart attack moment? I gave myself literally a year. So November 11th was my last day at Fox. November 13th, whatever that Monday or Tuesday was, I started hunting and pecking looking for the job. Went to Indeed.com and I see that the Silicon Valley Business Journal is not only hiring, they're rebuilding the newsroom because they were looking for editor-in-chief, managing editor, digital editor, and a couple of reporters. So Curious Gary reaches out to the then editor who had written a little kind of an op-ed saying, hey, here's me, been here 7 years. I'm out. Here's why I'm leaving. So I reach out to Joshua, like, are you leaving truthfully off the record? Is this doesn't look good from the outside? He's like, oh, no. I need to hit the reset button, career audit. I'm like, oh, you're talking my language. I thought, well, I didn't come up through the ranks of American City Business Journals. I don't deserve to be an editor in chief. I have not earned that. To me, the research I did on the organization was most editors in chief didn't come from the outside. They worked their way up from reporter, senior reporter, managing editor, right, for years. And so I applied to be digital editor because I was essentially digital editor for, if you remember, Bike Radar and so forth. And of course, for job security's sake, if you're a digital churn, the digital editor is in charge. Well, right away, folks at corporate that were interviewing me said, oh, digital editor? How about managing editor? I go, oh, okay, that's fine. That works for me. And then we advance a little bit more. And then I get a message from Rob, the VP of content, former editor of the Cincinnati Business Courier. He was editor in chief for 20 plus years. So again, worked his way up, do his thing. Now he's at corporate, right? He messages me, says, hey, quick question. I promise it's not going to be hard and it's not scary. It's like, oh. And then I give him a call. He's like, been talking about things. We want you to be, we'd like to offer you, he corrected himself, to be the editor in chief because we feel like you have that connectivity with Silicon Valley. Because my wife has been managing Red Rock Coffee in downtown Mountain View for 18 plus years. That's where WhatsApp started. I've interfaced quite a bit with Jan Koum, and I've interfaced with enough Googleites and Appleites and Nvidiaites over the years. And again, mind you, all those years in the bicycle and motorcycle industry, like I told Rob and the others, I would gravitate to the CEOs and the decision makers and entrepreneurs and the back end people more so than the tech stuff because the tech stuff doesn't always resonate with me. So I thought, oh, and the first words out of my mouth were, my mom's going to be so happy. So I'm thinking back to 1985, 86. She's like, oh, honey, you should go into something else. Like, I don't like journalism. So, complete turnaround. The nice thing about that was I got to decide or weigh in um, on hiring everyone in the newsroom. But I can look back now on the 18, 19 months and go, oh, I'm so glad it turned out this way. But having faith that even at my age, leaving a job at 57, wondering what's going to happen at 58, still being here at 59, and most of my peers, if not all of my peers who are senior editors, former editors, respective markets for ACBJ. So there are times where I'm on a call, I'm thinking, are they going to say, "Hey, sorry, we were wrong. You, yeah, we don't know if it's going to work." I think they took a risk and a gamble on me, and I've made it a point every day uh, before I come in to uh, have my best editor in chief pants on, but really abide by the generous, wonderful support that ACBJ has created. And when you eloquently described what we do, that's what all 40 ACBJ newsrooms do around the country. We're all hyper local, right? Now there's a challenge in Silicon Valley. Everyone thinks that we're tech reporters. Well, we do report on when the big tech companies like Apple and Nvidia and Meta and so forth, when they do big commercial real estate deals, because they've been dropping billions combined just in this last year alone to buy up the offices that they had been renting previously. But that's what our readers are looking for. They want to see the tea leaves, what's happening with commercial real estate as offices are being converted into housing, as offices are being expanded when there's acquisitions or shrinkage, or AI is like this shark going right down the middle of the pool, and everyone's wondering, do they hop on its back, or do they leave the pool? Right? So we're not going to report on the latest AI struggles with Apple or the latest iPhone or even Nvidia's latest GPU. That's tech reporting that we leave to so many of the others, and I think that's why ACBJ has not just survived but thrived since it began in 1982 in Kansas City.
That's, man, typically when I hear about people's backgrounds, I get on this podcast, that is, I get one of two things. People have either been in like local journalism, traditional journalism, back to their childhood or even generations back, or they come from somewhere completely outside of the realm. And I feel like you kind of fall into the latter category, but that's great. And anybody who's come from a prep school in the Midwest to starting a charity in Africa to the bike industry. That's a really cool story, man. I'm a bicycle and motorcycle hobbyist. I'm not super heavy into it, so I appreciate that
Yeah.
stuff too. I had to sell my motorcycle when my twins were born, but maybe someday I'll get one again. But that's great stuff. So you kind of were talking about the business journal and stuff, and it's kind of a good leeway into one of my other questions I was wondering if you have any takeaways for this audience coming from journalism, but focused on like a different industry into something more local. Are there any takeaways for somebody else looking to make that change, or something that you've noticed or that stick out in your mind to being more of a local kind of, local business,
Yeah.
but local? Does that make sense?
I think it behooves all of us as journalists to think, you know, maintain a sophisticated mindset, drink in a lot of the news. Don't let yourself be too influenced by what other people are doing and producing necessarily. But again, retain the information, seek and verify, for yourself how it applies to your role in your organization. But if someone's feeling like they have this gut instinct or this itch to move on, or in my case, move on over, or even whether you think you feel qualified or not, but you're wanting to hit the reset button, by all means do it, because a classically trained journalist, and that does include modern technology, right? The podcast we're on now, uh, the video component that was added maybe 15 years ago. It is about finding common ground. It's about doing due diligence. It's about asking a few of those open-ended questions that maybe no one else has asked before. Case in point, when I was in Cycle World, I ended up taking a Ducati motorcycle up to nearly Mendocino to interview Steve Jones from the Sex Pistols, avid motorcyclist, a good friend of Ducati North America CEO Jason Chinook. And I thought, all right, if I'm lifestyle and culture guy for Cycle World, who wouldn't want to interview Jonesy? So I get up there and I did my homework to see that do not ask Jonesy a question about Sid Vicious or Johnny Rotten. Just don't. But I'm thinking, God, what else is there? So I dug, and I had all these great questions. I get into the place he was renting with some pals from LA, and he's like, we sit down, and he's got this gorgeous guitar, and he's just playing it. I think that's kind of his comfort zone, always having that guitar, little mini amp, you know. He's like, let's start off with Sid Vicious. I'm like, I will if you will.
That was unexpected. Yeah.
And the fun part was I was able to, you know, we talked about that briefly, and I said, all right, because he just came out the year before with his autobiography called Lonely Boy, and it's very raw, right? And he's always been very anti-establishment, anti-government. God Save the Queen is kind of a naughty story about, you know, their angst for the Queen during that Jubilee year in 1977, right? So I said, fun fact, I said, when I read your book, I didn't buy it. I said, no offense, Jonesy, but I asked the library to buy it because they all have the budget to buy books. So now your book, paid for by government funds, is in the library. He's like, right on, man. So we bonded, and then a couple months later, I was down in LA with my son, returning some Harleys from a national tour, and we ended up riding in Angeles Crest with Jonesy for like 7 or 8 hours. And because I respected him, I went into it. I did my homework. Again, see that's the same. Now, if I get a chance to interview Jan Koum from WhatsApp, I'm going to do my homework. I know the guy loves classic Porsches. He has quite a collection. You know, I haven't seen him at Red Rock Coffee in a long time, but that's our duty as journalists, is to, you know, find the common ground, find that unique angle, but know who your audience is. Like in our case, you know, it's C-suite, it's small business owners, it's construction folks, you know, it's developers, it's the professional services, the lawyers. And so, you know, I think our average with our readers, the average household income is 500,000. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at average household incomes, it's usually 50 to 90,000 around the country. The average revenue of the companies that are in Silicon Valley, you know, our readership base is 300 million. So anytime there's something that pops up, hey, should we do this? Like, okay, put your C-suite hat on, put your medium to large size business owner hat on. What would they think, right? So that's a good barometer. But that, again, that does apply. You know, when you're talking about, whether you're talking about bicycles, when you talk about motorcycles, I do know, as you as well probably understand, Paul, when you go to a party and you could have some highfalutin folks there that really don't care about what they do, or they have an NDA, like people are out here, they can't really say anything, but I'm a project manager at Apple, and there's no details offered. They find out you're a journalist, or they find out you're into bicycles or motorcycles or something fun like that. You become the center of attention. So you better have you better have your money quotes and your facts straight. But as good journalists do, you can always turn around and say, well, what do you ride? What would you like to ride? If you had a different job, what would it be? If you don't seem happy there, what's your dream job? If you don't want to work for anyone else anymore, describe the dream company that you would start and with whom. And then you
Yeah.
deflect it. And yet you have all this intel. And then
Yep.
there are times where I've had to tell people, by the way, everything you just share with me, I guess, is on the record. So don't be surprised if it pops up. You know, I'll never do a gotcha on people, but I do have to tell people if I'm going on a bicycle ride or a motorcycle ride that's business related. Every once in a while, I'll let you know I'm the editor of Business Journal in San Jose. Unless you tell me otherwise, it's kind of part and parcel with my absorption of all this intel and data. And now that doesn't roll into anything that I might produce for the Business Journal, but I might share it with one of my reporters or managing editors, just as background, right?
Hmm.
Or I do a monthly column called Editor's Notebook, and there are times I do talk a bit about, like I did write extensively about my Rwanda experience, because I published it the Friday before the World Championships in Kigali, because it was timely. So again, journalists, we want to be timely. You know, what's the Silicon Valley local angle to that? Tom Ritchie's been based out of Palo Alto or Woodside for decades. That's my backyard. Jock Boyer, he's been in Monterey. Monterey County is part of our patch. So basically, two Silicon Valley titans of the sport, right? It would have been different if they were from Ohio or Wisconsin. It would be a stretch for me to do that. So again, always going right back to common ground, knowing the reader, and then you do your darndest to become the expert, and your bosses and overseers will take note. And sometimes you have to ask for it as well, right? hey, I really think I'm ready to be a senior editor. I think I'm really, or a senior reporter rather, or I think, you know what, I think it's time for me to consider maybe moving to another ACBJ market because I see there's a position open here and there's nothing here. And again, like I mentioned, ACBJ is so supportive that we want to keep people, each ACBJ employee is like a pinball. We want to keep everyone in the ACBJ pinball machine, right? Because you invest in people, you train them up, you offer them support. They're cranking out, the stories through the business journal lens, as we call it. Of course, you want to hold on to them, and maybe someday it'll become an editor in chief or even a publisher, right? With 40 newsrooms, that's a lot of people, a lot of personnel, a lot of
Y-
talent.
Yeah. So I had another question here, and it's pretty specific. That's what I wanted to ask you because you're in a pretty specific situation where you said you're reporting, it's a lot of data, it's hyper local, but you're in the Bay Area. Just, I mean, it's everything, and the tech ecosystem and everything. I'm just curious what it's been like reporting like hyper local there in a region specifically that has business stories going global and national and huge all the time. Is there a lot of increased I don't know if we call it competition for like covering stuff, or do you see things come
Yeah,
up in your reporting that then blows up into some huge national story just because of your geography and your specific
yeah.
yeah
The
situation?
Our biggest story last year was a story we published on Christmas Eve, December 23rd, about one of the local Kohl's stores, and Kohl's is based in Wisconsin, where I'm from. Um, there was an update, a moderate update. They were closing it down finally. The Los Altos School District was planning to put a school in there and redevelop the whole property, and that was already news. But Asia Martin, our reporter, who lives in Mountain View like I do, she was walking through there and saw these extreme 80% off signs. And so she wrote something about it. A very typical but well-researched story from her angle because she was new to the area. She moved here from New Jersey or the July of 24. And she published something and the story blew because at the time they were looking for Kohl's was looking for a CEO. They're publicly traded. That happens sometimes. Asia, once again, she was at an event. Pat Gelsinger, the previous Intel CEO, he was shown the door last December, and he kind of came back, and now he's chief technical officer of an application that helps churches, and he's still living in the Bay Area. He happened to be there with his wife. They struck up a conversation. Asia's had two stories she's written, and I'm sure in time, because no one else got to Pat. Everyone's like, the interim CEO. Let's keep reporting on Intel. What's happening? And if you've been following the news, you have the government that just put in a bunch of money. You have Nvidia that just invested a bunch, so on and so forth. Apple's thinking about that. Well, that's big tech news. That's like part of the big seven, right? But Asia it was standing at an event, standing across from Pat, having a conversation. That's hyper local. Same thing anytime there's a ribbon cutting at a mass timber place at Google in Sunnyvale. At first, Asia was like, why am I going to this? It's Google. We don't report on Google's this or that. She ended up going, met the right people, talked about things, reported the story, another huge story. So hyperlocal also includes when a restaurant opens or closes, how many Starbucks are closing locally. Because small business opportunists are going, oh, if Starbucks are closing in these pockets of Silicon Valley, maybe we should put some funds together and open up our regional chain, or maybe Dutch Brothers from Oregon and Arizona. They're starting to move in, right? Never thought that would happen. So it's when things move hyper local. So there is also, it's very tempting to report on the earnings each quarter. And sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. Again, we're pretty small staff compared to other HCBJ newsrooms. We have three reporters, data reporter, two managing editors. Managing editor for print is also a special projects editor. And there's me. And we have a creative director designer who's offsite. So many times we have to choose what we're going to invest our time and resources into, but we always have to serve our readers. And the lists I was referring to before, these are lists that we publish each week. And we actually put together a book of lists, 100 lists at the end of the year that is a resource for our readers to use the following year. All this data, all this contact information. And that's been something that we've been doing since the company started in 1982. So it's still holds its weight. So the local business lens is what really separates us from the competition. Now, mind you, we also have an ACBJ newsroom just north of us in San Francisco Business Times. They focus quite a bit on IPOs, more of the tech. We have a function with not all of our newsrooms, but many that's for innovation. So Sarah up there is always reporting on We were doing that too, and our readers are like, we don't really care. So my publisher Tom and the team in Charlotte, where we're headquartered, said, "Hey, let's hunker down, rebuild, and refocus." And taking that to heart, what does that mean for us? We do partner with a lot of higher education. We have Stanford, we have Santa Clara University, we have San Jose State, which is literally a neighbor of ours. And we do a lot of events, have been for decades, and that's been bringing people together post-COVID. We have 20 events throughout the year. I think on average, our newsrooms do about 20, 25. So, I mean, that's a good revenue opportunity, and a lot of other news organizations are doing that. Ben, um, challenges with diversity and everything else meant that a lot of the bigger companies that did have government contracts earlier this year was like, we love to support these events. You guys are rock stars, but we can't expose ourselves like that. So we're backing off. And that was a bit of a retrench that hurt a little bit. And with our events too, we honor those structures awards, literally the structures that are being built, the biggest deals of the year. Walmart Tech Center, that was the biggest deal here in Sunnyvale, right? Here we're talking about Walmart. They're based in Bentonville, Arkansas, but they're making a big splash where they're building out this campus for 1,100 employees. And you would think, wait a minute, return to office in San Jose and Bay Area is horrible. Like these people still aren't coming back to the office. What are you guys doing? Well, their C-suite go, Walmart's onto something, right? And Adobe, their world headquarters is right down the street from here. I think they're at 20% have returned to office. And they've got a gorgeous headquarters, one of many, right? And so that's our challenge here is how do we report on, do the executive profiles like the Pat Gelsingers, but also we know we're not going to be able to get to Jensen Wong anymore at NVIDIA. I mean, we had total access to him just a couple of years ago. But if everyone else is doing that, how do we then, let's make sure that we're talking to the people at some of these eVTOLs, the electric helicopters that are going to be autonomous at some point. We have Waymo in our backyard. Now, that's part of Google, but because you have Musk with Tesla looking to do that, you have Uber and Nuro, and now Lucid, who's another EV maker in the Bay Area, looking to do the robotaxi thing. So robotaxis are very centric to what we do. Now, we can't go too crazy because we can love on Google all we want, but they're not going to love back. It's rare that we get direct quotes from them. Sometimes we are challenged by the fact that with all the shiny, wonderful websites, podcasts, influencers, YouTube specific business reporting that goes out there, people look at us and go, "Oh, it's that weekly paper, the Business Journal. They do a weekly newspaper. How quaint, how outdated." Not realizing that many of the stories that we publish here go on our national desk, or they get picked up, localized, and copied on several of our other news sites. So, we're actually, when you pull all together, the might and the reach of ACBJ is bigger than most of our competitors. But they don't know that. So it's our job when we see them in person, whether I'm up on the podium at an event or I'm doing a economic mayor's forecast, we're doing our women of influence, what have you, or the networking before or after, is just say, "Hey, did you know?" Because that's what I found to be true when I first started. It's like, "What do you mean so-and-so's not getting back to us? We're the Business Journal. We've been here since 1983. "Oh, yeah. Well, remind them. They don't know if the CEO is going to be available. We can make that happen. So we're always striving to talk to the top people, but we had to regain their trust and regain their understanding of what there's hyper fast change in how people get their news, but hyper local is ever more. And as we've seen here, so it's never ending, but it's business journalism. It's still 101 based on our founders, Mike Russell and Doc Worley, back in 1982 in Kansas City.
That's great, man. That's a great story. Gary, I had some more questions. Unfortunately, I just realized that I have another meeting to bounce to in a minute. It's just about a minute here, so I'm actually I have to cut it short. But please tell everybody where they can find you. And I'll link to anything in the show notes. Obviously, I don't know if you're on social. You're on LinkedIn. I saw you on LinkedIn, and I'll link to
Yeah.
SVBJ also.
Yeah, I mean the bizjournals.com/, San Jose is where you find what my team and I are doing every day. Yeah, by all means, people reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've had so many helping McAlpertons come alongside and provide insight and open doors for me. Love to do the same. And anyone who's still stoked about journalism is a friend of mine.
Awesome. And I'm gonna link to your podcast too, just because I'm a podcast guy and I like them also. And
Yeah,
it looks interesting to me. So, Gary, thank you so much. This was great. And I wish we could go longer, but like I said, I've got a conflict coming up real quick.
that's fine. Thank you, Paul.
Have a great day.
You too.